Hi everyone, welcome to this week's webinar. We wanted to take an opportunity this week to do a review and a recap on a presentation that we made to the CCC AOE conference last Friday. It was very well attended. There was a lot of interest in this subject of CCC Maker and Guided Pathways alignment, and so we thought it would be good to actually record a webinar with the information, the part of the presentation, and specifically relate it to our colleges and to help people understand and strategize how to align their CCC Maker project with a guided pathway initiative at your college. So as we presented these ideas last week, we were trying to communicate to our audience that CCC Maker is a really strong practical model that can actually align very easily and effectively with the Guided Pathways movement. Our outcomes and our goals as a student-centered model, focusing on student success and completion through to career success, is very much the goal of the Guided Pathway movement. So there's a lot of correlation there. So this is what we're going to be covering today.
And as Deborah mentioned, many of your colleges are having those conversations as we speak, and it's imperative to try to have some of you be part of that conversation. So hopefully this material will give you the right language to approach this subject.
Right. And of course, one of the things to remember is the CCC Maker Initiative is part of a larger workforce mission from the Chancellor's Office. And one way to think about this is that the Guided Pathway movement is a unifying framework that all of our initiatives can tie into. And the ideas from the workforce mission at the Chancellor's Office align very closely to the work that we're doing in terms of creating an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, using data to drive our decisions and to monitor our process, and to think about how we're going to use the innovation from the CCC Maker project at a larger scale. And the CCC Maker Initiative, we're one of the smaller initiatives from the office, but if you look, we're right there with Guided Pathways as part of this overall outreach and development that the Chancellor's Office is doing. So once again, in terms of this unifying framework with CCC Maker, we're looking at creating a network. We're thinking about working regionally. We're very focused on creating relevant and diverse programs. In fact, one of our specific goals is to support the Guided Pathways movement as it moves to develop students going into STEM and STEAM careers. And also we're looking at innovation and to some degree institutional transformation as we move into new curriculum and focus on entrepreneurship for students.
And just a little bit of the innovation that I know many of you have been part of, and know that this is an imperative problems that we're trying to bring up to scale that many of you are contributing to, and that's the middle skills gap, the 21st century skills that many of you are focusing on your makerspaces, the multiple array of disciplines that you're integrating within your makerspace that cover the range of STEM or STEAM fields. Obviously, the focus on internships, which brings the component of the experience of the student to employers and job preparedness for the middle school jobs that many of our colleges are focused on. And also to bring this initiative to the wider worldwide maker movement, which is very important to us to connect, which many of you have helped in that regard with your information and with your examples that we share in many conferences. Obviously, many of you are doing strong workforce projects, which is a Doing What Matters initiative that our state is currently under.
Right. This is something that we presented in a little bit more detail in the presentation at the conference, and it's something that if you look at our last webinar, 12.0, it goes into this in a lot of depth. But we were setting a context within which all of these initiatives are taking place, which is essentially that this rapid transformation of the workforce is already upon us, and it's incumbent on us to essentially future-proof our students as they move into their careers.
And for those of you who have not been part of the conversations about guided pathways in your college, it is a very interesting and I think very engaging model to all of you to be involved with, because it really talks about the essence of what you're developing currently in your makerspaces. And that's a couple of major goals that are described here, which is identifying the career goal for the student, developing a course outline for your programs that are involved within your college, but in the context of your makerspace, most of you are already doing that. Consistent guidance and support of the students to actually complete the program of study, and we'll go into detail about what that means. It's broader than just a certificate or degree. And also the concerted effort to support students throughout this progression, as it's a formative process that's developing student empowerment, and we'll discuss how many of you are already doing that as well.
So when we frame the CCC Maker initiative and why we're doing this and why the Guided Pathways initiative is working together, we see that we're looking at an outcome where students can achieve the relevant skill sets and soft skills that they need, that employers are demanding at this time. And we're acknowledging that entrepreneurship is a really important, increasingly important entry point for young adults who are moving into the economy, particularly through the gig economy. And we're also seeing a time where instructional delivery methods are changing rapidly, and so when we have a lot of online resources that we can be using as part of our programs, and then we also have this fantastic resource in the Makerspace which complements these new forms of instructional delivery, we can see that CCC Maker has a part to play in the Guided Pathways initiative.
These are the 4 pillars that are typically depicted in the Guided Pathways model. And there are kind of broad strokes here, so they're a bit broader than very specific practical implementations of Guided Pathways, yet it delineates a very concerted effort to clarify the path for students, and we'll go into detail how many of you initiated that through the startup process. Designing a method to bring in students and entering the path that they're choosing so that they can select a program of study that is empowerment and a bit more decision-based on informed decisions. And obviously throughout the path and exiting, having a design method so that students maintain and exit as intended, and as well as to ensure that the exit point, whatever the student selects that to be, is actually through the results of a positive effort of the students so that they get something out of what they experienced. And so all these design methods that many of you have already started, I think is something that aligns itself well with these pillars of the Guided Pathways.
So Guided Pathways, once again, institutional transformation, this idea of this large framework, and that's why it's kept, I think, deliberately simple at this level with the 4 main pillars that they're focusing on. And as you can see, evidence-based practices, interventions that will work at scale. These are all items from Guided Pathways that are also in our work with CCC Maker. And notice keeping students at the center of the design or redesign process is a key outcome. And so we would like to talk about how we thought about the implementation of our CCC Maker program as a model for this first stage of clarifying the path. And so we looked at it in terms of what are the connections between the maker movement and education? How can we make those connections and then build a program around that? So it was right from the very beginning, there was this idea that this thread of making has to run through the design of the project, not just in terms of what the student experiences, but in terms of having it integrated into the design process. So that was a strategy that was key in CCC Maker.
This is an example that we used in our presentation to contextualize for our audience last week that are not part of this initiative. Many of you are creating great assignments and projects similar to this one that is represented by Folsom Lake College. The faculty there, Mr. Zach Dowell, created an aquaponics project for which various interdisciplinary courses were integrated into one project. You may see the image in front of you where there's a tank with fish, which get their water filtered through aquaponics plant above that eliminates through chemical processes some of the nitrates or nitrites from the water so that the fish can live in a harmony. But at the same time, there's an interactive display that uses student input that is connected to an Arduino or Raspberry Pi microcontroller programmed by computer science students so that it becomes much more engaging. It's a learning tool. All of this was encapsulated within a very nicely wood finished form factor that had to be designed, had to be CNC cut to be displayed within a library, as you may see in the image. And so this interdisciplinary project included so many disciplines, so many classes, and a lot of work from students to be able to showcase this work. And we showed this as a representative project that many of you are creating within your makerspaces.
Yeah, the idea was to show that it is possible to actually produce learning within this broad interdisciplinary framework and at the same time develop 21st century skills and follow a process through. So this was essentially for attendees that were not familiar with the maker movement and weren't aware of the sophistication of the projects that can be developed in this model.
And don't forget, there's a Folsom Lake Spring Symposium coming up in April, so more on that later.
So to get into a little bit more detail about this idea of clarifying the paths to student end goals, this is actually the part where faculty and administrators, everyone has to come together and actually define what this pathway is. And this is before students even arrive in the work. And so you would remember in the startup process that we did, we started this process of critically examining and developing our projects and proposals based on a design thinking process. So this is something that we've seen become really an idea that's become increasingly influential across all the community colleges. So while you've had an experience with design thinking, you may actually encounter other people within the guided pathways movement who are also thinking about this methodology of design. But the key thing is, if you're engaging with guided pathways development on your campus, you need to have this larger overriding strategy. One of the issues that we're seeing with some colleges is they're just not sure where to start, what to do, what kind of process they need to use to actually develop their proposed pathways. So this can be a really valuable tool now that you're experienced in it to help the guided pathways team and get involved in the guided pathways team on your campus, because you have the skill and knowledge to actually help run this as a process. And so this idea of using design thinking and integrating the maker concepts with it is really crucial to this startup phase, or this first pillar of the guided pathways. And we know from design thinking it's about identifying problems, experimenting with prototypical solutions, and then implementing and sharing successful ideas. And of course, you would remember that throughout that process, we were using institutional self-studies, logic models, planning, activities with students and faculty to bring them into the process, and ecosystem mapping. All of these techniques would be appropriate and really useful in a guided pathway development model. And as an example, we had wonderful examples from across many of the colleges. And so we have, the work of Sac City, for example, really opening up and engaging stakeholders in getting their input into this pathway building, which is crucial to create a pathway that students actually will follow and which will be successful for them, and to get the engagement and commitment of your colleagues in your institution. We used ecosystem mapping, which is also being increasingly used statewide through the Chancellor's Office. And this mapping process through Kumu was a crucial step in identifying the strengths and weaknesses in your own ecosystem. And this could be really valuable in a guided pathways model as well.
These are some elements that really raises the conversation and what everyone's doing. And we realize that many of you are in the nitty-gritty of your internships and getting equipment purchased and spaces laid out, and those are very valid and very necessary and timely activities. However, the discussion of guided pathways is this broader context that we're bringing to the table here that we hope it helps everyone in their current colleges, and that's a bit broader. That's how do we have students career explore possibilities through research that they provide and dual enrollment that you may establish with your high schools, and eventually the work-based learning with industry visits and job shadowing. How do you integrate that into your makerspace, which many of you are figuring out? Developing the 21st century skills with the New World of Work curriculum that many of you have adopted and are using, as well as many preparation workshops that you're going to be running through your makerspaces, and how that can aid in the development of the student selection through non-credit or even just summer type activities within your makerspaces. Those are all on the table for you to discover. The focus on badging, which was been part of other discussions. I mean, that's really the discussion of competencies versus content. And that's a bigger discussion that you will have within your guided pathway faculty, where there may be allegiances to books and chapters and assignments that were previously done. When we talk about competencies and other student-centric, integrated-based curriculum, that is a bit broader. What is a competency? What's the project meant to address? What's authentic learning that we're looking for students? And what's the authentic assessment, which many of them lend themselves nicely to projects? And lastly, this idea that you delay the specialization of your major, where there's a concerted effort to focus on transferable skills, which we'll discuss in a moment. That way, later on, they get specialized within a major they select. And lastly, but most importantly, this idea of intrinsic motivation through the internships that many of you are providing for students. Very important for them to get on the path.
So if these are the elements that have been identified through our startup process, these are the elements that we would like to integrate into our system that could be part of a guided pathway. We also have this other idea of organizing all of those elements within an organizational framework. And this is really key, because developing a guided pathway is a large undertaking. It's extremely complex, and there needs to be ways of organizing all of these components into different buckets to see how they relate to each other, how they interact, how they're interdependent. And so this is really fundamental. One of the reasons that we have the CCC Maker project as with these 4 main outcomes is that it covers all of the activities and all of the elements, but it enables us to be able to focus in on a specific area. So this is a way of thinking like you're going to come up with a lot of elements. You've got to organize them into categories, and that makes it more manageable. It also enables you to share that language across the team of people developing a pathway. So helping students get on the pathway. Now, so once there's been a strategic approach to designing a pathway, the next step is to get the students onto it. And this is a component that would seem obvious historically. You just have students enroll in classes. But the challenge we have now, of course, is that with students needing to move quickly through their program because of everything from the need to get into the workforce quickly, or financial aid, and now the limitations that are now in place, we need to have students move efficiently through their programs. So one of the big ideas out of the Guided Pathways movement is the meta major. And you'll see that won't necessarily be called a meta major in all different colleges, but essentially a meta major is a way of simplifying and creating a gateway for students to come in through an interest or through a cluster of different occupational skills, or something that allows the students to test different career opportunities within an area. And this is key, because getting these students into the right pathway as quickly as possible will save time and money for the students, and will increase the success rates for the college. So the outcomes benefit everyone. The key idea is that you're creating a safe area for people to experiment and to explore their interests. And of course, when we look at this, we think of a makerspace, right? So when we think about the meta major idea within a makerspace, we're really looking at a whole range of different possible outcomes, everything from design to fabrication, the entrepreneurial aspect of it, so it connects to business, and it also connects to modeling, 3D modeling, animation, and other digital media. So when you look at the pathway that could be created through this one entry point, it enables students to get a taste of the whole range of occupations and careers that could come out through this one entry point. And also the benefit being that while you're doing this, you're also learning what the person on the other part of the workflow, or in another aspect of the same business, is engaged in. So it means that you have an understanding of the entire workflow, which is crucial. So students learn transferable skills in context in a makerspace. This is another big aspect of the meta major idea, that we're learning discipline-specific skills such as design thinking, prototyping, critique and data analysis, etc., and then technical skills within that specific discipline. But at the same time, we're learning problem solving and communication, leadership, teamwork, etc., and this the ability to solve problems in a creative and innovative way. And we're also creating this larger cultural awareness through diversity and through working on projects that may have a community or a regional or even a global connection, where people may be working on projects with people from different countries or different colleges. So there's a way of thinking about all the technical skills that we're teaching, but through the context of the transferable skills that will benefit the student in the long term, regardless of which major or career they eventually choose.
And I want to point out that that's a very critical point that Deborah's making, because the discussion and discourse of guided pathways, this is the essence of it. How do we progress students through a program of study for which elevated thinking and abilities and refinement of the skills get developed? And it becomes a discussion about these outcomes of a student through a program of study in a guided pathway versus content in a textbook or everything that was covered before. And I think inevitably the discussion will always come up that we won't be able to cover everything that we covered before. And that's a very valid point. We've addressed that in multiple occasions, Deborah and myself talking to other faculty about that concept. Yet if our goal is to achieve the student success, to engage in planned exits, again, this could be an exit for entrepreneurship, it could be skills-based, it could be a certificate, it could be a degree, or it could be transfer, that those are designed, well-intended, and that and including all these skills that you see in front of you. As an example, I know that we have from some of you that submitted some of this, where some of your classes may offer a lot of hands-on technical skills and focus on that because that was the traditional methodologies of learning. Yet, because of Makerspace and all the great technology that is being offered in many of these sites that you're developing, well, you have the ability to integrate technology and facilitate the production of some of the previous artifacts, which then lends itself to include presentation, mathematics, including the writing about the proposal in many ways, for which then you have time because of the technology and the Makerspaces to include all these other aspects to a very rich project like what you see in front of you.
So here's a key example of how a meta-major approach could help a student. This is from Cabrillo College. Thank you very much, John. Actually, these are students that are working with Pace and McNett. And this example, Joseph, is a classic example of a student who comes in with the intention of becoming an engineer, has trouble and struggles in the engineering program, and then decides he becomes disenchanted with that major and decides to drop out. He goes over and takes some art classes, thinking that it's going to be easier, and then he starts encountering these engineering principles through making, and it helps him develop the skills that he needs and really importantly, the confidence to go back into the engineering program and be successful. Now, ideally, in a guided pathway model, this would never happen. Joseph would be in an interdisciplinary meta major when he comes in. He would learn the tools, be empowered through it, and then he could move into the engineering pathway better prepared. So it's also a bit of a design principle too of slowing down a little bit, doing a little bit more work at the prep stage, and it pays off when the student is more successful more quickly in the long run. We've seen students, we all know students who change their major and then have to go all the way back to the beginning and start a program again. And this is what we're trying to avoid with guided pathways. And another example, Dave, also from Cabrillo College, and his background is different. He was a homeless vet and he's looking for a career path. He doesn't need a long certificate program. He doesn't need an AA or transfer. What he's really looking for is an opportunity to start his own business, and he's building skills towards that goal. So when he discovered 3D printing in an art course, he realized that there's actually a business opportunity in helping people learn to use 3D printers and to do maintenance and repair on them. So that's actually how he's developing his career, and he's working within the Makerspace as a technician and will be starting his own independent work as a result of this experience. And, in the larger sense, an example that we've used recently is the idea that someone who is interested in sewing as a craft and as a program of study through a fashion program, as some of the colleges currently have, can build on that interest and that skill and start out with it in the relatively low-tech analog world, and then can start to supplement those skills through online resources such as fabric design through Spoonflower. They may start their own micro enterprise such as this Etsy example of repurposed clothing. It may help them if they're currently working in retail for the technologies that are coming into that field. And it may also create an opportunity for collaboration with people from other disciplines. And as we see increasing reshoring coming in with textiles and fabric, so sewing becomes a skill that's very much in demand, but it's not just sewing anymore. It's within this context of a semi-automated hardware, software-driven process. So there's also these new emerging technologies in industries such as wearables and composite materials such as energy generating fabrics. So a person who starts with that simple interest in sewing can branch into many, many different occupations. So
once your students are empowered, how do you help them stay on the path is the question. And so this is a little bit more of the intrinsic motivation aspect of guided pathway, which the makerspaces are very primed to be able to support. That's the stackable credentials all the way up to transfer, having career exploration happening as discussed earlier in the examples Deborah provided. Applying the integrated academics with the soft skills and the technical skills and applied learning matters to help synthesize the major that the students eventually want to get into. Developing that entrepreneurial mindset as examples provided, as well as making the learning visible. That's always of importance to the students' transformation so that they can show what they're learned through the portfolios. And of course, those are used for the internships that the local employers can then inspect and have students be on their way to their careers and employment.
So when we're talking about keeping students on the path, there's a tendency to think about it more in terms of just academic performance. But what the Makerspace initiative is showing is that there is this much larger context of community, involvement, engagement, and we know the research shows that the #1 way to stop students from dropping out from college right at the beginning of their college experience is to have them actually make meaningful connections with at least one other person. And that has to happen within the first couple of months of arriving in a college. And so the Makerspace can become really instrumental in creating that first welcoming experience for a student, and then all of these other opportunities, the career focus, the diversity of learning, the range of projects that students can engage, really empower and keep the student engaged. And ultimately, that's what will help a student stay on a pathway when they're seeing the opportunity that's coming and they're making it happen for themselves. So this is crucial. So student empowerment happens in different ways. There's the access to the resources at a reasonable cost, which would be otherwise prohibitive for most of our students. It's also the celebration of the maker as not just a student or a learner, but also in being able to teach and mentor others, which builds confidence. It creates a professional network as you're meeting more and more employers and people within the community. It allows a space for experimentation and risk and failure, and then success through iteration, which is crucial. Most current experiences that students have in college are based on a pass-fail measure, and we're looking at it in a different way when we're thinking about making, and students really respond to this. It develops that resilience so that students, if they do fail, are more inclined to go back and try again, to think about an alternative solution, to empower themselves to make these decisions and to gain purpose. So this is a key. And finally, the integrated academics are key because we're embedding numeracy and literacy skills in a way that is project-based and is intrinsic, and it really helps students get over the fear of math and the fear of writing. And so these are crucial to helping a student complete their program of study.
We discussed a lot of the development of internships in previous webinars, but so look back at some of those, how we frame some of those discussions. And many of you have participated in multiple methods to create your own flexible ways of approaching this, but definitely this is something that can be designed, included in any program of study. Obviously, the Makerspace lends itself nicely to have students develop artifacts at that location. But if you are talking to your general faculty community at your college, this is an example of how you can strengthen the development of students through work-based learning. There's multiple different ways to bring the continuum to practice. Using your Makerspace or something similar to that, there's like a CSI labs for a lot of either Department of Justice type or chemistry type or biology type of disciplines. There's including other methods of learning that could be much more hands-on for many other disciplines that maybe not as technical as the ones that you're approaching. But this is an example that you can bring to life and bring student learning through your guided pathway discussions. There is another aspect to guided pathways, is that ensuring that students are learning. And this is a factor that many of you have seen in implementation in our current project with the reporting that you are providing. So it started with the method of analyzing your self-study. If you recall, through the startup process, that included a lot of analysis of your current student understanding and your campus itself and where you're at, and that required some institutional research, searching and looking at Launchboard data. The ecosystem mapping, the KUA mapping, was also part of that process, because we wanted you to look at the current ecosystem around your college and where you maybe needed to do some work, or maybe where you can start off with some leveraging some existing connections. There was a planning process, if you recall. That was the work plan and the budget correlation that many of you would be part of in guided pathways. There's a similar work plan and budget development that is currently happening with your colleges, and that's important for you to realize that that's something that you've done. And likewise, everyone is starting from a current baseline data, whether it be success rates, persistent rates, FTS rates, everything that it gets involved, and where it is and maybe where it could be, with multiple discussions that you may have with your staff and faculty there. All of this is data that should be open source, which is an aspect of the Maker movement that I think is very important, that I think we underestimate, is that open source technology, open source data is meant to bring people together versus having everyone in their own silos and not knowing what the actual outcomes are of their efforts. So I encourage you to bring this up in discussions with your faculty. Ultimately, whether it is through the startup process that was just described, your students looking at information that you're designing through meta majors, or ultimately your progression in this project in guided pathways, it's about data-informed decisions. And so there's always this active engagement with data to just measure your progression towards an ultimate goal. It does require a bit broader and maybe bigger systems thinking, which may not be where we all function all the time, because we're involved with the day-to-day and the activities of classes and ordering, and I realize that that's always part of the difficulty with this. But if you consider the process to be a formative that gives you direction versus a summative that you look at from what happened a year ago and transition to that, it can help and maybe ease some of the day-to-day sort of static with a bit more of directive action. And many of you have seen that in the quarterly reports that we purposely created, and we'll talk about it in a moment, where they're meant to be formative so that you can change direction much quicker as you develop your design. And that's the point, is that it's iterative. It's not that you just plan it and execute it and you don't know how it worked a year later. It's actually measuring smaller chunks so that you can make informed decisions and integrate the quality of what you're doing within the actual planning itself. Again, it's a sustained support that we're trying to bring to all of you versus an accountability measure, and definitely not a compliance measure, which is not what the Guided Pathways is meant to be, nor the CCC Maker initiative. It's meant to be, again, a transformative methodology that all of you are participating under. Many of you have seen the projected dashboarding that you will see roll out in a public forum soon enough. We use a tool like this to discuss your current status of your Makerspace implementation. And again, this is all the different activities that are meant to be seen. And the idea is that through time, you see how the internships, the Makerspace, the community practice, and curriculum are all helping each other out, as discussed earlier, to create this experience for your students, which would then increase the progression of students through your Makerspaces, and the activities that you're planning are then gauging towards the increasing of some of these metrics that are meant to be collected to give you an indication of where you're at. Again, many of you have asked whether low numbers in these metrics indicate a negative, and that's not what it's for. What it's for is to see where you're at and what activities and planning are you doing to then going to do after that reflection. That's more critical, that action, rather than the actual numbers and where they're at. And some of you have responded with like zeros in a lot of these, but the point is that you've been doing a lot of planning, which is much more critical. And so this is an example of how planning for your guided pathway would be, I think, very well received by folks who think that the guided pathways is a compliancy measure. And ultimately, it's nice to share with all of you how the collective impact that all of you are producing in a shared dashboard like this brings everyone together under one umbrella, that we can show that all the efforts are being really measured and seen by and impacted by the activities that you're planning, and the little micro decisions that you're making every day cumulatively are creating this broader impact to our community. And so this is just a method to bring everyone together. I realize that the guided pathways have its own metrics and dashboard that they have out there. I invite you to look at those within the Launchboard platform and look at what they are. But I also invite you to create these micro measures that will actually have folks see where they're at collectively within your college. This is something that can easily be done with a Google Docs or Excel sheet that many of you know how to put together.
So just to sum up what we've been looking at and exploring, which, you know, it's a really interesting development for us too, because the work that we did in developing our own project informed the process that we used at the CCC Maker initiative. And so now we're in an interesting position where we're seeing that the professional development that the CCC Maker teams have done, that you've all done, actually really qualifies you to be leading this initiative on your campus and to really be involved with it, because this is an opportunity once again to leverage the work that you're currently doing into an initiative that is both complementary and also is being embraced broadly across all of the community colleges. So it's really worthwhile engaging the guided pathway team on your campus, familiarizing yourself with how the work that you've done already qualifies you to be engaged in this guided pathway work. Share the methodology that we used in the startup phase. Think about, you know, really, it's great to see so many colleges developing design thinking curriculum. And we've got, I think, 4 or 5 now that are doing workshops. They're actually developing certificates with integrated design thinking. And this is crucial. The more people who understand this problem-solving approach, the more effective the guided pathway model will be on that campus, because it really requires a degree of flexibility and a process that can be used uniformly across multiple disciplines and multiple different departments and divisions. So really think understand that the skills that you've developed through this process are really valuable to your campus community right now. We have a how-to guide for Makerspace development coming out that also details the process in the startup process. So each of these steps that we engaged are outlined. So when our guide comes out, which will be in the next month or two, you'll be able to share that with your college community. Really focus on interdisciplinary curricular development. That's where the strength of the program really lies, in your ability to make those connections across multiple disciplines in the college. That's a sustainability strategy, and it's also going to really ensure that your makerspace is used by the most diverse group possible. We're really thrilled to see so many of the colleges engaging with K-12 partners and also with four-year colleges to really think about this pathway as something that extends all the way from K-12 all the way to a four-year degree, but with career embedded within it at every stage. And then make sure you're sharing your experience through presentations to your board of trustees and divisions and faculty meetings, and make sure that you're using, whenever possible, the opportunity to mention that the 4 pillars of the guided pathway movement actually align really closely to the work that you're doing. And that will really help to not only strengthen your Maker project within your college campus, but it'll also ultimately benefit the students who are going to be experiencing these pathways in the coming years. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Salomon?
Well, I think many of you are leaders within your institutions, and we realize that this message that you can bring up to your colleagues can be quite impactful. I'm honored to be able to learn a lot from you as you taught us through this process how to implement some of these ideas, and I think your colleagues would be well served if you shared it with them to include a broader discussion at the campus community. And there's other factors that we realize we didn't discuss here, but we're conscious that there's the concept of what's workforce development versus just general education development. That's always seems to muddle the discussion. There's the prospect of outcomes-based funding that's out there in the horizon that some folks are concerned about. All of those are factors that I think are just indicative of the fact that we just need to think about student design programs and be more responsive to their needs and, of course, the outcomes of our program. So this is a methodology that I think may serve to be more empowering versus deficit, as using the term that was used for the student, but to use it for our terminology, for our context of creating a student experience. If we empower yourselves and you empower your colleagues to design and to feel confident of designing such a construct, then they'll be much more proactive versus reactive to some of the changes that are coming to our systems that are meant to shift us in ways that may be uncomfortable for some, but if you implement some of these methodologies, I think you would be able to adopt these changes and go in stride as they come to your campus. So lead on.
Mm-hmm. And finally, of course, if you would like us to engage with people on your campus, if you want to have a meeting with people from your guided pathways development work with your Maker people, we would be very happy to engage in a meeting, either a Zoom meeting or some other kind of activity. But please just let us know. We are we're really committed to the idea that the Makerspace initiatives really do offer a foundational strategic approach to guided pathways development on your campus, and that you are really in a fantastic position to guide the guided pathway development on your campus. So thanks very much. Also, as this presentation was given at CCC AOE last week, we really wanted to thank the colleges that were there. We had 6 colleges represented in the audience. It was fantastic. And the reception to the presentation and these ideas was really strong. So you can expect to hear more about this in the future as we continue. So thanks very much. That's it for today. And for those who are coming to the symposium tomorrow at Glendale, we're looking forward to seeing you then. And for those who are not, we'll be sharing the information from that symposium. And remember, we have the symposium coming in the 13th of April up at Folsom Lake College, and we'll be looking at curriculum very much with this interdisciplinary idea and pathway approach in mind. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.
See you. Bye-bye.